Read Talk is supported by Redesign. With the power of machine learning, Redesign derives patterns and trends that accurately predict the characteristics of finished reads. Founded by Logan Esterling, Redesign makes quality reads with characteristics you can count on. Save valuable time and get back to what you love, making music. Visit redesign.io to learn more. Welcome to Read Talk. I'm Margaret Marco.
And I'm Courtney Miller. We are very excited to welcome our guest today, Logan Esterling, founder and reed maker in Redesign. He lives in Seattle, Washington, and plays oboe and English horn in Symphony Tacoma and the Yakima Symphony.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Logan.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's such an honor to be speaking with you.
Well, I should just say, in full disclosure, that your company Redesign does sponsor Read Talk, and we're very grateful for that.
Yes.
I think the work you're doing is just so important and so amazing. So I'm so excited and happy to be contributing.
Well, and your support really helps. I naively began this podcast with Courtney thinking it would be absolutely free to launch a podcast.
Yeah.
As it turns out, there are costs involved. So your support definitely helps us pay for those surprising costs that we encountered. So Logan, how did you get the idea to start Redesign with Antonio Dowling?
Last year, like so many of us, I was no longer working, and I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I decided it was a good time to start a reed business. And that's all it was supposed to be at first, was just a normal reed business, nothing that special. But Antonio brought up the idea of integrating machine learning into the business, which I had almost no knowledge on. So yeah, it kind of morphed from just a normal reed business into something hopefully much bigger.
And what do you mean by machine learning? I wonder if you could elaborate on that a bit.
So machine learning is based on the idea that systems can learn from data, identify patterns, and then make predictions without much human involvement. So basically what we're doing is collecting mass amounts of data, as much as I can, as many reads as I can make. And the machine learning model learns from analyzing the data that we give it. And then we feed it partial amounts of data, and then from that partial amount of data, it makes predictions. And then depending on how accurate those predictions are, it learns from what it got right and what it got wrong. So then as we feed it more data, it can make even more accurate predictions in the future.
And what kind of predictions does it make?
You can kind of steer the predictions how you choose. So, for example, you could predict the vibrancy of a reed by giving it the data of an assorted piece of cane, and it would predict, okay, this piece of cane is going to vibrate this amount. Of course, the predictions now, as we're collecting data, they'll get better and better, but the predictions now could be more accurate.
I'm intrigued. I can't wait to hear more about this in the future and the research that you're building. Do you have any advice for other young entrepreneurs?
My advice would be to find something that makes you unique, something that makes you stand out. And then also, hopefully, that thing that makes you unique excites you about what you're doing and really gets you motivated to give it your all. That would be my biggest piece of advice.
Well, that's excellent advice. Yeah, and I didn't actually realize that your company was so young because you seem so well established. I mean, I see you all over social media, and I was perusing your website last night, and you have many items sold out. So you're clearly thriving, which is wonderful to see. Yeah,
thank you. It's amazing how much we've grown in 8 months. The first few months, like any business, were pretty slow. I was lucky if I got a couple of orders every week. Mm-hmm. And now I'm getting, upwards of 10 orders every week, which is a lot of reeds to pump out.
Congratulations.
Yes, congratulations. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Speaking of your website, I've seen a product on there that really intrigues me, and that is your monofilament nylon thread. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So I actually first read about using monofilament nylon in Graham Salter's Understanding the Oboe Reed. It's such a fantastic book. Every reed maker should own a copy. But there's a really short blurb about it in there, and I thought, you know what, let me look into this, give it a try. So basically what I found is the standard FF nylon thread that most oboists use is braided nylon. So meaning there are a bunch of tiny nylon strands that are spun together to form the thread. Monofilament nylon is one continuous strand of nylon. So that has a much smaller surface area and is much less material to vibrate. So reeds tied with monofilament nylon will vibrate more readily than those tied with braided nylon. And I've found this to be true, as have other reed makers, such as my teacher, Mary Lynch. But we're also testing this theory and collecting data on the differences between monofilament nylon and regular nylon thread.
Fantastic. I love this science-driven approach to reed making.
I want to ask how you are pumping out the reeds, so to speak. How do you produce consistent quality reeds in high volume?
Honestly, if I knew the secret answer, I would tell you. But I think there are a few things. So I think the most important and obvious factors are quality cane, a healthy gouge, and a sharp knife. That's kind of the baseline for making good reeds. But more specifically, I would say there are two things that are really important. First, building and utilizing a large toolkit of ways to problem solve each reed, and treating each reed as its own problem to solve. They are not all the same, as y'all know. But I would say my second piece of advice would be knowing when to let a reed rest. And I think that's something that I've really learned over these past 8 months, is that if I've made progress on a reed, say it's more responsive and has a better crow than when I picked it up that day, I'll do my best to leave it alone and not keep going. And I find that produces the best results.
How many days do you generally spend making reeds before you ship them out to their new home and destination?
So usually my reeds take about 3 to 4 days to finish. It depends on the reed itself and which process I choose to use. Sometimes I will tie a reed, scrape off the top 2/3 of bark, thin the tip, clip it open, and let it sit for a day. And then my other kind of style is to scrape it out day one until it crows a C, and then I'll let it sit for a day.
And you mentioned one of your secrets was to use good quality cane. So how do you determine that? What do you look for in a good piece of cane?
That is an excellent question. Some oboists are extremely picky and may find, one piece in every quarter pound or every pound, right? And others might use cane splitters and only reject a handful of pieces. I tend to fall on the pickier side of cane selection, but the most important thing I'm looking for is, quality, straightness, and diameter. And by quality, I mean the healthiness of the piece of cane. So when I'm looking for healthiness, I'll look for, tight vascular bundles, a nice golden brown, rich color, and not too much mottling or, discolorations. Straightness, obviously, I just want it to be straight, not too bowed or sway-backed. And then diameter, I'm looking for something that's, as close to the curve as possible. But, ideally, a piece will have all three of them. Those are like the magic pieces. But if a piece has one or two of those factors that are pretty good, I will likely use it.
I love your Sunday show, Meeting and Reading series on Instagram, where you invite a different guest every week and make reads with them. Can you share with us how this began?
Well, I love making reads with other people, and I love learning what works for them and why it works. So last year, once lockdown hit, I couldn't have friends over for the normal read parties that I would have. So I decided to take it online. And so far, I think I've had 33 different oboists on the show. And the amazing thing is I only knew a handful of them prior to starting the show. So it's been a great way to network and make new oboe friends and learn a lot about what works for other people.
I love that you had reed-making parties prior to the online version.
Yes, yeah.
Because I did some of my best reed-making as a student when I made reeds with my friends.
Yes. Oh my gosh, totally. You learn so much from letting other people try your reads, and even just hearing them, in the same room can tell you a lot about what's working well for someone.
Yeah, and I think I paid more close attention when I was making reads with someone else in the room. I don't know why that is, but it helped me be more attentive to the details.
Definitely, yeah.
Let's talk about your read-making mentors. Who are they? And what did you learn from them?
I would say my biggest read mentor was Mary Lynch. She is a phenomenal read maker. So her, and I would also say Russ DeLuna. I worked with him a couple of summers ago, and he really transformed my English horn reads.
Well, both Mary Lynch and Russ DeLuna have been guests on Read Talk.
Yes.
So if you want to find more about their ins and outs of read making, you can listen to their episodes. But that's wonderful. You have excellent mentorship in those two individuals.
Yeah, I'm very, very fortunate.
When you're at your read desk, because you're spending, I would assume, many hours at it, how do you pass the time with your ears? Do you listen to anything, music or podcasts, or?
I tend to listen to podcasts, Read Talk, for example.
Oh, of course.
Excellent. Good choice.
Yes, yeah. And sometimes I'll listen to true crime podcasts. Sometimes, if it's late at night, I sometimes can't. It's a little too freaky. Right. But occasionally I'll put on music. Sometimes just putting on an oboe record really gets me inspired to make great reads and sound like, John Farillo or whoever I'm listening to.
How do you think you'll be able to balance your read-making business with your playing once we're out of quarantine and we can get back to our normal lives of playing?
So most of the time, most days I'll tie between 7 and 14 reads, and I'll move the reads from the previous day to the next stage. So I tend to have something always in every stage, which is really, really helpful. And another thing is that I use the same materials for my read business that I would for my personal reads. So, if there's one amazing read that I just can't let go of, I'll slide it into my read case. Yeah. But another thing that we're doing is we're actually thinking about shifting the model of our business so that every week, maybe every Monday, we would update our shop with what reads we have for sale that week.
That's a new model. That
is an intriguing model and less, perhaps less stressful for you.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the biggest issue, like you're saying, Margaret, is, once playing comes back and I have to balance practice and gigs and all that, I think this model will be much healthier for me.
I have a question based on something you brought up. You mentioned that you've always used a read journal, and now that you're doing more scientific exploration with your reads, how has that journal changed? Like, what does your read journal look like now?
Yeah, great question. So I actually have a read binder now. So, it's just a nice, inch binder, 3-ring binder. And I have, tabs of different experiments that I have active. I guess that's something else I should mention is I like to make reads in batches, and usually I'll try to isolate some variable. So for instance, diameter, and I'll make, a whole batch of, 9 reads with 10.5 diameter just to see, how they relate to one another, how, that variable impacts the final result, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I keep a binder and I have a bunch of different sections. I take a wide array of data points for each read, micrometer measurements, each stage, and I'll take, final measurements, and I'll even do some playing tests and record how those go, do the objective tests, the octaves and A to G, and see how the read is performing compared to how I expect it to perform.
Do you use a micrometer to measure a finished read and the gouge piece of cane, or just the gouge piece of cane?
Yeah, so I do both. I definitely use the not in the read micrometer, the standard one, to measure, the specifics of the gouge, which are very important. But I also use the in the read micrometer. I don't make my reads based off of the in the read micrometer, but I do use it as a data collection tool. Yeah,
we're seeing maybe two different camps of opinions on whether to use the micrometer for the finish read. So I think it's fascinating.
Is there anything else you are passionate about and want to share with us and our listeners today, Logan?
This relates back to meeting and reading. But I would say, just